Before we start, please make sure to like, subscribe, and share this video with your friends and family. Also, can you please tell me where and what time you're watching? Thanks. Everyone knows that a father's love for his child is indescribable, a force so profound that words often fall short. It's no surprise that most fathers would go to great lengths for their children, but surely there's a limit, right? In my case, I discovered just how far I was willing to go for my son Michael on a dark, unforgettable night. Let's rewind to 2017, a year that felt like a relentless storm. It all began in January, when I received devastating news. Michael, my 18-year-old son, was battling kidney failure. The diagnosis hit me like a thunderbolt. Michael had always seemed so healthy. He exercised regularly and maintained a balanced diet. He wasn't involved in anything harmful like substances or bad habits. Through tears, I asked the doctors how this had happened. Their answer was cold and detached. Sometimes, it just happens. My world crumbled in that moment. It was supposed to be a milestone year for Michael. He had just graduated high school and was excited to start college, ready to embrace a new chapter in his life. But life had other plans, and everything came to a halt. I couldn't bear to watch his future slip away, so I started searching for answers. Before long, the doctors recommended a kidney transplant as the best course of action. Without hesitation, I volunteered to be a donor. But when the tests came back, I was crushed to learn I wasn't a match. My blood type wasn't compatible with Michael's rare O-negative type. It felt like another blow from fate. Michael's mother, who had shared his blood type, had passed away during childbirth, leaving him as my only family. Learning that I couldn't save him shattered me. The only option left was to place Michael on the transplant waiting list, but the reality was grim. The list was painfully long, with wait times stretching from 5 to 7 years, time we didn't have. Meanwhile, Michael had to endure relentless dialysis sessions. I felt powerless, watching him suffer and unable to alleviate his pain. As the months dragged on with no progress, I became desperate. I reached out to friends, family, and countless doctors searching for any solution, but nothing worked. Frustrated and terrified, I found myself praying to something greater than myself, even though I had never been particularly religious. Just when I was about to lose hope, an unexpected opportunity came my way. Through Facebook. Desperate times call for desperate measures, and I decided to post Michael's story on Facebook, hoping to find an O-negative donor. It felt like a shot in the dark, but I had nothing left to lose. Months passed without any concrete responses. Then, on May 15th, 2017, I received a message that caught me off guard. A stranger reached out, claiming they'd seen my post and knew of someone on Facebook Marketplace willing to help with a kidney transplant. I wasn't sure whether to be relieved or suspicious. Facebook Marketplace was unfamiliar territory for something so serious, but I had to try. After exchanging messages, I connected with a man named Thomas Green. He claimed to have O-negative blood and was willing to donate his kidney. When I nervously asked about the cost, bracing for an astronomical figure, his response left me speechless. Thomas said money wasn't an issue, but he had a favor to ask. What he said next would change everything. Thomas asked me to meet him in person to discuss the matter further, claiming there were details he couldn't share through text. It sounded strange, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. But I was desperate. Since Michael's diagnosis, I had done extensive research and knew buying a kidney wasn't easy. Prices typically ranged between $50,000 and $160,000, but given Michael's rare O-negative blood type, the cost could skyrocket, possibly up to $262,000. That kind of money was far beyond my means, but I was ready to do anything. Borrow, sell everything I owned, whatever it took to save my son. When Thomas offered to help without asking for money, it seemed almost too good to be true. It wasn't long before he sent me the meeting location. The date was set, May 25th, 2017. As the day approached, my anxiety grew. I didn't tell Michael about this. Thomas had insisted I keep everything a secret. Instead, I confided in my closest friend, Cedric. When I explained the situation, concern spread across his face. "Look, Ben," he said, "I know you're trying to help, but this sounds way too sketchy. How can you be sure this guy isn't some kind of kidnapper or worse? This is illegal and dangerous. Are you thinking straight?" His words hit me like a ton of bricks echoing in my mind. Deep down, I knew Cedric was right, but I felt cornered. My son was stuck in the hospital, growing weaker each day, and I couldn't bear to wait years for a transplant. "This is desperate," I said. "I know it's illegal, but what other choice do I have? Michael needs help now." Cedric kept trying to convince me to reconsider, but he could see my resolve. In the end, he offered his support and even volunteered to come with me. I explained Thomas had insisted I come alone, but I made Cedric promise that if anything went wrong, he'd look after Michael. His assurance gave me some peace of mind. When May 25th finally arrived, my heart pounded as I headed to the address Thomas had given me. I arrived to find two men waiting. They escorted me to what appeared to be an old warehouse. Inside, they led me to a room where Thomas was waiting, flanked by two hooded individuals. Thomas's face showed a mix of seriousness and unease, but I could sense something sinister lurking beneath the surface. Standing in the doorway, the enormity of my decision hit me like a freight train. The place felt shadowy, and the reality of what I was doing started to sink in. Doubts swirled in my mind, but Michael's face, trapped in that hospital, pushed me forward. I had to do this. As I stepped into the room, I noticed cameras set up around the space. The two hooded figures appeared to be recording everything. Thomas turned to me with a smile that sent a chill down my spine. "Hi, Ben. It's great to finally meet you," he said, his tone unsettling. "I don't have time for pleasantries," I snapped. "What do you want me to do?" Thomas's grin widened, as though he enjoyed my directness. "I like that. Straight to the point," he said. "I'm sure you've been wondering about the cost of my kidney. Don't worry, I'm not going to bankrupt you. My requirements are different." Relief washed over me for a moment, but it didn't last. Thomas picked up a small blade and turned it over in his hand, a sinister glint in his eyes. "What I need," he said, "is for you to cut me." I was speechless, my mind reeling. Thousands of questions flooded my head, but all I could manage was, "Are you going to record this?" "Of course, Ben," he exclaimed as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "You see, we're alternative filmmakers. Some people call it snuff filmmaking, but we see it as pure art. We capture moments of real pain. Sometimes we even perform simulated surgeries without anesthesia. The best part? You don't even know what you're doing." The information stunned me. I tried to keep my composure, but my thoughts were spinning like a whirlwind. "Wait," I stammered. "I haven't agreed to anything yet. Besides, if I go through with this insane idea, what happens to the kidney you promised me? What if it gets damaged?" Thomas looked at me with an unsettling calmness. "I understand your doubts, Ben," he said. "But I give you my word. Once you cut me, the kidney will be safely prepped and sent to the hospital for your son. It's a fair deal." There was a twisted pleasure in his tone, a sinister satisfaction that made my skin crawl. But I didn't have the luxury of second-guessing. I had already come too far, and my son's life was on the line. To be honest, I was terrified. My hands trembled and fear gripped me. But I couldn't let Michael die when there was a chance to save him. "Okay, I'll do it," I mumbled, my voice barely audible, knowing full well how insane it sounded. Thomas's smile widened, his eyes gleaming with an unsettling excitement. "That's the spirit. I knew you wouldn't let me down, kid. Your son will be proud of you," he said, his words a mockery of the situation. They only added to my growing sense of dread. "Don't worry," he continued, almost reassuringly. "Your face will be edited out. No one will ever know it's you." With that, Thomas removed his shirt, revealing a body covered in horrific scars. My stomach turned as I noticed prosthetics on his feet, hinting at unimaginable torment. He handed me a blade, then drew lines across his skin like a grotesque map. My hands were trembling, and my heart was pounding like a drumbeat of doom. There was no turning back. I took the blade and, with shaking hands, plunged it into his skin. Thomas screamed, but not in pain. It was a scream of bizarre pleasure. Blood gushed out, pooling on the floor as I tried to follow the lines he'd drawn. My panic mounted as I realized how much blood he was losing. "He's losing too much," I shouted. "We need to stop." "Keep going," they yelled at me, but my vision blurred, and I felt like I was teetering on the edge of insanity. As the knife moved in my trembling hands, I thought of Michael. What would he say if he saw me like this? I could almost hear his voice begging me to stop, telling me this was wrong. The weight of my actions crushed me, and I couldn't continue. "I can't do this," I said, dropping the blade. Thomas, still conscious despite the blood loss, glared at me with fury. "Why did you stop?" he hissed. "I'm sorry," I muttered, my voice barely audible. "I just can't do this." Thomas's anger flared. "Don't be a coward, Ben. You came this far and now you're backing out? What kind of father are you?" His words sliced through me, but my resolve had crumbled. The room seemed to close in on me, the air thick with fear and guilt. I had crossed a line I could never uncross, and I realized that saving my son didn't mean losing myself in the process. Thomas's demeanor shifted, becoming more menacing. "Fine," he said, picking up a knife. "If you won't do it, I'll show you how it's done." Panic surged through me. I wanted to run, but I couldn't. They restrained me and forced me toward the blood-soaked table. Thomas's eyes burned with a twisted fervor as he prepared to act. Suddenly, the sound of sirens pierced the tense atmosphere. The hooded men froze, their panic evident. "Police!" one of them shouted. Thomas's face twisted in rage. "Did you call them, Ben?" he bellowed. Before I could respond, a commanding voice rang out from outside. "This is the police, you're surrounded!" Chaos erupted. Thomas grabbed a knife and pressed it against my neck, snarling threats as the officers stormed in. Guns drawn, they shouted commands, the tension in the room reaching its breaking point. Their guns trained on him, the officers shouted, "Let him go, Thomas!" He clenched his jaw, his voice a mix of defiance and delusion. "You don't understand. We're creating art, exploring the beauty of pain and death." Thomas was beyond reason. One officer, keeping his voice steady, tried to calm him. "Release your hostage and drop the knife. This doesn't have to end badly." But Thomas saw no way out. His eyes gleamed with a mix of madness and resignation as he muttered, "I'll show him the true art of pain, even if it's the last thing I do." In a frantic motion, he shoved me to the ground and lunged at the officers. Before I could react, the deafening sound of 6 gunshots rang out. Thomas crumpled to the floor, his lifeless body sprawled in a pool of blood. But what chilled me to the bone was the haunting smile frozen on his face, as if he'd found some perverse satisfaction in his final moments. As the chaos began to subside, the police swept through the warehouse. What they found was worse than anything I could have imagined. Hard drives filled with horrific content, gruesome murders, surgeries performed without anesthesia, and recordings of self-harm. It was then that I learned the truth. Thomas wasn't his real name. He was Roland Duan, a man with a history of severe self-harm and multiple hospitalizations. He had escaped from care facilities and was diagnosed with an extreme form of sadism, a disorder that fueled his obsession with pain. His so-called snuff films were sold to others with similarly twisted inclinations. To my surprise, who doesn't love the thrill of receiving a message on Facebook? That mix of curiosity and excitement to see who's written to you, especially if it's a complete stranger. My name is Laura. I'm 26 years old, and I work as a real estate agent. My career has taken off nicely, and I've been doing quite well at the company where I work. People value me not just for my sharp mind and charisma, but also because I stay fit and make it a point to exercise nearly every day. One night, while I was scrolling through Facebook, my phone buzzed with a flurry of notifications. It was as if every guy out there suddenly realized I was online and decided to bombard me with messages. Who could resist that attention, right? But honestly, most of them used cheesy, overused pickup lines that came off a bit awkward. However, one guy stood out. His name was Frederick, and he was undeniably handsome. It was refreshing to see someone who didn't rely on cliches to impress. Frederick simply introduced himself and gave me a heartfelt compliment. His sincerity caught my attention, and we quickly realized we had a lot in common. Over the next couple of weeks, our chats became almost a daily thing and everything seemed perfect, until it wasn't. One day, Frederick noticed I had liked other guys' pictures, and his tone shifted completely. He became possessive, accusing me of cheating, even though we were just chatting online. At first, I thought it was a joke, but it quickly escalated. He bombarded me with questions. Who were these guys, and why was I liking their posts? It was ridiculous. I tried to stay calm, but his constant pestering soon wore me out. One night at 4 a.m., I woke up to my phone ringing incessantly. Frederick was calling, furious and yelling because I hadn't responded to his messages. Overwhelmed, I told him to leave me alone. That's when I decided to block him entirely, hoping it would put an end to the madness. For a couple of days, things seemed peaceful, and I thought I could finally breathe. The flood of messages stopped, and I felt relieved. I thought I had finally moved on from the guy who had somehow convinced himself we were in a virtual relationship. Feeling free again, I returned to socializing on Facebook. I started chatting with others and liking photos again. A few weeks later, I met a guy named David. He seemed genuinely nice, and we hit it off right away. We messaged often, commenting on each other's posts, and decided it was time to meet in person. We set up a date at an Italian restaurant for the next evening at 8 p.m. The day of the date arrived, and I was about 10 minutes late because, well, isn't that what people expect from a lady? When I arrived, I didn't see David anywhere, so I figured traffic might have delayed him. I sent him a quick message saying I was already there and found a table to wait. After 20 minutes with no sign of him, I began to feel uneasy. I sent him a few more messages, but there was no reply. Frustrated and feeling stood up, I decided to head home. That night, just as I was resigning myself to the thought that David would never contact me again, my phone buzzed with a message. But when I opened it, my heart sank. It wasn't David, it was his sister, and her words were devastating. She told me David had been found dead in his... Here's a rewritten version of your paragraph, keeping the word count intact and ensuring it flows naturally. That night, just as he was getting ready for our date, David was found dead in his apartment. According to his sister, someone had broken in and stabbed him several times. There were security cameras, but the attacker's face was blurred in the footage, making identification impossible. I couldn't believe it. I was devastated. Shocked and overwhelmed, I struggled to process what had happened. A few days passed, and although it was tough, I tried to move on. Months later, I started chatting with another guy named Jason, a lawyer. We clicked instantly, discovering many shared interests. After some time, we agreed to meet for a date. Jason promised to pick me up at 7 p.m., and I eagerly anticipated seeing him in person. We planned to visit a fancy spot in the city, and I couldn't hide my excitement. When the time came, I was ready, dressed, and waiting for Jason. But as the minutes passed, frustration grew. He never showed up. I tried calling him, but his phone was off. Questions raced through my mind. Had I said something wrong? Did he lose interest and decide to stand me up? Eventually, I decided to stay in, make some pasta, and relax with a movie. As I settled on the couch, breaking news flashed across the TV screen. There had been a tragic car accident. A young man had collided head-on with another vehicle, and when the police arrived, they found the other car abandoned. The reporter said the man in the crash had died instantly. I froze as they showed his photo. It was Jason, the guy I was supposed to meet that night. Goosebumps covered my skin. The coincidences were too strange. That's when I remembered what had happened to David, the other guy I was supposed to date. He had been murdered. Was it me? Was I cursed or attracting danger? The thought sent chills down my spine. Later that night, as I lay in bed, my phone vibrated. The message was from an unknown number. I opened it and my heart sank. The text read, "Look what you made me do. Do you like this date?" Attached were 2 photos, both of the men I had talked to before, the ones who had died. The man in the pictures was smiling, clearly enjoying his twisted work. Terror consumed me. I felt sick, knowing I had to act fast to stop this psycho before more lives were lost. I immediately called the police and reported everything. They arrived quickly, and though I provided every detail I could, they couldn't catch the man. From that day forward, I swore off dating altogether. The fear of being stalked and targeted was unbearable. Life moved on, but I was never the same. I became hyper-aware of my surroundings, constantly feeling a dark presence lurking nearby. Then, one day, the police called me with news that brought both relief and horror. They had arrested the killer. Apparently, he was picked up for a minor offense, and upon checking his fingerprints, they realized it was David, the man I had initially blocked on Facebook. That psychopath was responsible for the 2 murders. He was prosecuted and sentenced to 35 years in prison. Although justice was served, my fear of online dating never faded. Since then, I've stayed far away from Facebook flirts and random chats. Some wounds leave scars too deep to heal. Facebook has been around since the early 2000s, and people have been logging in ever since to stay connected with friends and family or to meet new people. There are groups to join, events to create, and some even use it to organize family reunions or parties. It's a versatile platform, and in recent years, Facebook introduced its own free dating feature. I'm Luna, and here's why I ultimately decided to delete my Facebook account. I had just gone through a tough breakup with someone I thought I'd spend my life with. After some time, I started to rediscover myself, but my best friend and roommate, Anna, kept encouraging me to re-enter the dating scene. One morning, over our usual coffee before work, she brought up Facebook's dating option. "You should try it. It could be fun," she said. "I can't," I replied. "I'm not joining a dating app. They always end up being creepy, and I'm not about to pay for that." "That's the best part," she countered. "It's completely free. You can join anytime and date whenever you want." After thinking it over, I decided maybe it wasn't such a terrible idea. "Okay, I'll give it a shot tonight after work," I said. That evening, after a long bubble bath, I settled down with my phone and began setting up my Facebook dating profile. Like everyone does, I picked my best photos, carefully uploaded them, and tweaked my profile until I was satisfied. Once everything was set, I left my phone charging and went to bed. It wasn't long before the messages started pouring in. I was amazed at how many guys showed interest, but most of them were pretty generic, the same old boring lines and empty compliments. Then one message stood out. It was from a guy named Joshua, and he was as attractive as he was charming. While most messages were things like, "Hi, beautiful," or "How are you?" Joshua's was different. "Hi Luna, it's Joshua. How have you been tonight?" The personal touch immediately caught my attention. He even told me I was the only girl he was talking to, which felt refreshing. Unlike the guys who spam the same tired greetings to multiple women at once, Joshua seemed sincere. I replied, "Hi Joshua, it's nice to meet you. I'm fine. And you?" He quickly responded, "Likewise, Luna. I'm doing well. I hope this doesn't sound cliche, but I have to say you're really beautiful." His honesty was disarming, and I found myself drawn to his straightforwardness. There was something about him, a spark that made me feel excited. Maybe dipping my toes into the dating pool wasn't going to be so bad after all. We chatted for hours that night, and I fell asleep with a smile on my face. The next morning, I couldn't wait to tell my friend Sam all about this promising new guy. Over the next few days, Joshua became a constant presence in my thoughts. We talked every night, and as I got to know him better, I learned he was an entrepreneur who had started his own business. At first, I was cautious. It sounded a little too good to be true. But after checking his Facebook profile, I found he had over 1,000 friends, photos with hundreds of likes, and comments from people who seemed real. He appeared trustworthy, and I let my guard down. When I told him I worked part-time at a burger joint while studying to be a nurse, he seemed genuinely interested. Unlike other guys, he wasn't pushing for a physical connection. However, he was a bit insistent about meeting in person, saying he couldn't wait because he found me so beautiful that he wanted to see if the connection was real. My heart, still fragile from the breakup, began to beat faster with a glimmer of hope. Eventually, we agreed to go out for dinner and watch a romantic comedy that had just been released. Sam helped me get ready, and as butterflies swirled in my stomach, she asked, "Where is he taking you?" "To that new Italian restaurant by the movie theater," I replied with a mix of excitement and nerves. "He seems very into you. He's coming on a bit strong, don't you think?" she said, sounding cautious. "I don't think there's anything wrong with that. He likes me and I like him. Isn't that how it's supposed to work?" "You don't think his urgency is a red flag?" she pressed. I was too caught up in the excitement to consider her warning. "It's fine, Sam, I promise. He seems great." She sighed but reminded me to be careful, and I reassured her everything would be okay. When I arrived at the restaurant, my nerves were in overdrive. I told the host I was meeting Joshua, and he led me to a table. But the man sitting there wasn't Joshua, or at least not the one I had seen on Facebook. Instead, an older man with a strange smile greeted me. Something about his expression sent a chill down my spine. I wanted to turn around and leave, but I didn't want to be rude. After all, who doesn't use slightly misleading photos online? Maybe he deserved a chance. "Hello, Joshua," I said hesitantly, forcing a smile. The man let out a low, mocking chuckle. "Actually, my name is Kevin," he replied. "Kevin? I thought it was Joshua." "There must be some mistake," I stammered, already standing up to leave. Suddenly, his demeanor changed. His eyes darkened, and he slammed his hand on the table, making me jump. "You're not going anywhere," he growled. "If you wanted to find me so badly, here I am." Shame and panic surged through me. Without a word, I turned and walked briskly toward the exit, wishing I had listened to my instincts earlier. As I reached my car, my hand began to tingle and a wave of dizziness washed over me. I managed to get inside the car and texted Sam, recounting what had just happened. Her response was immediate. "Luna, this doesn't sound right. You could be in danger. Head to the police station now, I'll meet you there." Fighting the dizziness, I drove to the nearest police station where I was quickly attended to. Sam arrived soon after, and together we filed a report. What we learned was chilling. It turned out Kevin had coated my car door handle with a drug to incapacitate me. He was linked to a sex trafficking ring and had multiple fake social media profiles that appeared legitimate. Even worse, Joshua, if he even existed, was Kevin's brother and an accomplice in their operation. Kevin was the bait, finding and intimidating women, while Joshua waited to attack once the drug took effect. I was one step away from falling victim to their horrifying scheme. Thankfully, the police station was close enough for me to act before the drug fully kicked in. I shudder to think what might have happened otherwise. That night, I deleted my Facebook account. I couldn't take any more risks. I learned the hard way that when something feels wrong, you should trust your instincts. To anyone reading this, if something doesn't sit right with you, listen to that inner voice. Danger often lurks where you least expect it. I've always been passionate about cars. Ever since I was a little girl, while my friends were obsessed with Barbies and dollhouses, I dreamed of engines and horsepower. My dad had an old BMW M series that made a tremendous noise, and I loved sitting in the car as he parked it in the driveway. Fast forward a few years, and at 17 I finally had my driver's license. That old BMW was too powerful for a beginner like me, so my dad bought me a Fiat 500 instead. It was an adorable little car, and I fell in love with it instantly. I even customized it a bit, adding my own personal touches. To this day, at 22 years old, I still have it. I wouldn't part with it for $1 million, even though it's a bit old and breaks down often, normal for older cars. When it broke down again recently, I had to find a mechanic. After a quick Google search, I found one nearby. I took my Fiat in, and the mechanic told me he needed to order a part. He asked for my phone number so he could let me know when it arrived. That evening, while I was relaxing at home, I received a message from him, but instead of an update on the part, he was asking me out on a date. Feeling uncomfortable, I lied and told him I had a boyfriend, hoping it would deter him. The next day, I went to the shop because he said the part had arrived. However, when I got there, he told me there'd been a mistake and I'd have to come back another day. That night, after watching a romantic comedy, I logged onto Facebook and started liking and commenting on some photos of guys I knew. Suddenly, another message popped up. It was from the mechanic. I froze as I read it. He was furious, accusing me of lying about having a boyfriend because I was liking and commenting on other guys' pictures. He even told me he wouldn't fix my car and that I deserved to get into an accident. It was brutal. Instead of responding, I blocked him, wanting to avoid further complications. This guy clearly had issues, and I didn't want to deal with him. About an hour later, I heard the doorbell ring. My heart sank. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I peeked through the peephole, I saw him standing there with a bottle of wine in his hand. I didn't open the door. Instead, I yelled at him to leave, or I'd call the police. My hands were trembling as I watched him slowly walk away. Once he disappeared, I felt a wave of relief and tried to relax. But just when I thought I was rid of him, I received another message on Facebook. It was from an account with no photo or activity. The message read, "Hope you like red." A sense of unease washed over me. What did he mean? Why was he still contacting me? Trying to brush it off as another one of those random creepy messages, I returned to the couch. But then, something happened that made my blood run cold. I was home alone, enjoying the quiet, when I heard a noise coming from the kitchen, the unmistakable sound of a bottle being opened. My breath caught in my throat as I walked cautiously towards the sound. When I reached the kitchen, I nearly fainted from shock. There he was, the mechanic, climbing through my window and pouring wine into 2 glasses. I screamed in terror, demanding he leave, but he didn't even flinch. Luckily, my neighbor saw everything through the window, and this guy was still approaching from the yard when my neighbor, noticing the commotion, decided to peek in and see if everything was okay. When I opened the door, I quickly explained what was happening. My neighbor immediately stepped in and went straight to the kitchen to confront the stranger. The mechanic, as brazen as ever, acted like he belonged there. He claimed to be my boyfriend and said he was just here to spend the evening with me, holding up the wine bottle and glasses as proof. My neighbor glanced at me, and I shouted that the man was lying. At that point, we decided to call the police. The moment the mechanic saw me dialing, he tried to bargain. "We can avoid all this if you just agree to go out with me," he said with a sly grin. My neighbor, protective and visibly frustrated, took a step toward him. The mechanic's demeanor shifted in an instant. He reached out and grabbed a knife from the table. My heart dropped as panic surged through me. He turned toward my neighbor, knife in hand, and I thought he was about to attack. Sweat dripped down my forehead as 1,000 horrifying thoughts raced through my mind. Was this how it was going to end? But then, unexpectedly, the mechanic stopped. He smiled, a strange, unsettling smile, and said, "You're a bad girl. You need to learn a lesson. But I see you already have someone willing to help you." We were both frozen, unsure of what to say or do. The mechanic set the knife back down on the table, looked at me one last time with an unsettling mix of longing and menace, and turned to leave. As he walked away, I shouted after him, telling him I knew where his shop was and who he was, and that I wouldn't hesitate to report him to the police. He simply smirked and replied, "We'll see each other again." Thankfully, that was the last I ever saw of him. Although nothing physically happened to me, the entire experience left a deep scar. I never imagined that a simple Facebook message could spiral into such a terrifying ordeal. From that day forward, I became far more cautious. My neighbor's quick thinking might have saved my life, but the lingering fear still haunts me. I share this story as a reminder to trust your instincts, be vigilant, and protect yourself, because dangers can lurk in the most unexpected places. A couple of years ago, my girlfriend, now my wife, and I were settling into a new apartment. In the process of cleaning and downsizing, we decided to sell off some items we no longer needed, including our old TV. It was still in good working condition, but we had upgraded and it was just taking up space. Instead of the usual classifieds, we thought we'd try out Facebook Marketplace, which had just started gaining traction. We figured it would be fun to see what kind of offers we'd get. My wife was confident someone would jump at the chance to take the TV off our hands, possibly even saving us the hassle of delivering it. Sure enough, we started receiving messages almost immediately. Among the inquiries was one from an older man whose message caught my attention. He explained that his own TV had recently broken and he couldn't afford a new one. He lived alone with his dog, and while he didn't have the full amount we were asking, he offered 70% of the price and said he'd make up the rest by doing some plumbing work for us. Should we ever need it? There was something about his message that struck a chord with me. He reminded me of an uncle I'd been close to growing up, and I instantly liked him. He seemed like a kind man who had hit a rough patch. After discussing it with my wife, we decided not to sell the TV to him, but to give it to him for free. However, we knew he might feel uncomfortable accepting it as charity, so we agreed to his terms and told him we'd hold on to the TV for him until he was ready to pick it up. He asked us to wait 3 weeks, as he was sorting out some personal matters, and we happily agreed. We took down his address and told him we'd be in touch. 3 weeks later, we called him on a Saturday morning to arrange the drop-off, but strangely, he didn't answer. We tried a few more times with no luck. Since the TV was already packed and taking up space, we decided to drive to his house anyway. If he wasn't home, we'd leave it with a neighbor. When we arrived, his small house stood quietly at the end of a long driveway. It looked unassuming, even inviting, with a neatly trimmed lawn and a faded porch swing swaying gently in the breeze. But as I approached the front door, an odd feeling crept over me. I knocked firmly and waited. No response. I rang the doorbell, the chime echoing faintly inside. Still nothing. Thinking he might not have heard me, I peered through the front window. That's when I noticed them. At first, I thought the dark specks on the blinds and windowsill were just dirt or maybe mold. But then one of them moved. My stomach sank as I realized they were flies. Dozens of fat, black flies clustered in a buzzing, writhing mass. A chill ran through me. Seeing 1 or 2 flies in a house is normal, but seeing that many? My mind immediately leapt to the worst-case scenario. Flies like that don't just gather without a reason. Something was wrong. I stepped back, trying to shake off the growing dread, but the image of those flies stuck with me. I returned to the car and told my wife what I'd seen. Maybe he's just on vacation and forgot to clean up, she suggested, though her voice was uncertain. But deep down, I think we both knew something wasn't right. After a moment of hesitation, I decided to call the non-emergency police line. I explained the situation, our arrangement with the man, the lack of response, and the unsettling scene at his window. The dispatcher assured me they would send someone to check on him. We waited in the car, the minutes stretching into an eternity. Finally, a police cruiser pulled into the driveway. 2 officers got out, spoke to us briefly, and approached the house. They knocked, called out, and eventually decided to enter. What happened next was surreal and horrifying. As they opened the door, a stench so foul it seemed almost tangible spilled out, making even the officers gag. One of them stepped inside, his hand over his mouth, while the other turned back to us with a grim expression. "You might want to leave," he said. "This isn't something you want to see." We didn't argue. We drove away, the image of those flies replaying in my mind. Later, we learned the man had died of a massive heart attack shortly after our last conversation. His body had been there for weeks, unnoticed except by the flies. The experience haunted me. Death is an inevitable part of life, but the suddenness and randomness of it, how someone can go from being a voice on the other end of the line to a decaying memory, shook me to my core. And those flies, with their mindless buzzing and relentless swarming, became a grotesque symbol of how fragile life truly is. In the end, all I could do was take solace in the fact that we had tried to help, even if it was too late. The man's story reminded me of the importance of kindness and connection, but it also left me with an unsettling truth. Sometimes life's fragility reveals itself in the most unexpected and chilling ways.